We're dealing with a new series I'm calling Relational Leadership, and we're looking at the book of Jude as our text. In Jude, there's only one chapter, but in verse 12 and 13, there's actually 5 different word pictures that Jude uses here of bad leadership. Let's look at it. Verse 12, he said, "These are spots in your love feast, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves." Wow, what powerful words, what graphic imagery that he is using here about bad leadership. He said, this is not the way you're supposed to lead. These are spots in what they call love feast. Love feast was something that the Christians practiced in the early days of Christendom, that they would come together and just have a big banquet and have as they called it, a love feast, a wonderful time. But he said, these people are not thinking about others, they're only thinking of themselves, they're only serving themselves. That's bad leadership. Now I'm going to use as an illustration of good leadership the life of Paul, how that Paul dealt with Onesimus, and Tychicus, and Philemon in a very delicate problem in the Roman Empire. One of the biggest problems that they dealt with was the problem of slavery. It wasn't racial or ethnic slavery, it was economic slavery. In fact, they said that 1 out of 2, 1/2 of all Roman citizens were slaves. It became a massive problem for them. In fact, educated people, for instance, doctors, they would tell us that almost all doctors were slaves because they didn't have a banking system. They couldn't go get a loan for their education. So the way they got the money for their education was from someone that would just loan them the money, and then they had to work for them to pay off the debt. So this was a massive problem. Onesimus had been a slave of a man by the name of Philemon. Yes, the same Philemon that is in your Bible. I know that there are people today that they shudder to think that a man could be a slave master and still be a Christian, but Philemon was. And it wasn't something he started out to do. It was a cultural problem. It was something he inherited. It's the world that he lived in. And sometimes these are the most difficult problems to deal with. Now, if we're going to deal with these difficult problems, we have to step out of our comfort zone. That's what Onesimus did. Onesimus, as a slave, evidently stole money from his master and ran all the way to Rome, which was 1,000 miles west of where he lived in the city of Colossae. And when he got to Rome, some reason or another, he ends up in jail, and he meets this man by the name of Paul, the Apostle Paul. Paul wins him to Jesus Christ, and now Onesimus, his conscience is bothering him, and so he wants to go back to his master, to Philemon, and make things right. Now that's definitely getting out of your comfort zone. Something I noticed that Paul does here very wisely, he did not send Onesimus alone. I think sometimes the reason that we fail in some of our endeavors is because we don't make the right connections with the right people. Paul sends a friend of his by the name of Tychicus. Tychicus had come from Colossae. Tychicus knew Philemon personally. He sends him along with Onesimus as he returns to make things right with his former slave master. Now, the attitude that you see expressed is an attitude of service. The reason that they returned was to serve. History tells us that eventually Onesimus became the bishop overseeing these churches of Colossae. But that's not the way he returned. He returned as a servant. He returned to make things right. And that's what relational leadership is all about. It's a relationship of influence. Influence. Leadership should flow out of service, not our status. We have nothing to prove we are here to serve. And just because you have a title doesn't mean you are providing the leadership. So as Onesimus goes back to make things right with Philemon, leadership depends on people accepting our influence. Paul knew that. And Paul has influence here, but he knows he's got to use it wisely. Now, there's basically 4 different styles of leadership. 4 different styles. There's what's called directing, and then coaching, and then supporting, and finally delegating. The way I think of it in my mind, I think of it first of all, and I've done this for so many years in training young ministers, I take them with me and let them watch me do it. Then I take them with me and let them help me do it. Then I take them and I help them do it. And finally, when I get to the 4th stage, I realize when I know they're ready, I just send them to do it. So let me talk about these 4 different styles of directing, coaching, supporting, and delegating. The first style, directing. Basically, this is where we preach to them. We tell them what they're supposed to do. This is the first stage. And when it comes to directive behavior, it's very high influence because you're telling them what to do. You lay it out, and people can call it micromanaging or whatever you want to call it, but you've got to give them the information because they don't know what to do, so you tell them what to do. It's time for you to pray. It's time for you to read your Bible. Memorize this verse. I mean, you give them all the instructions, but it's very low in emotional relationship. You haven't come to that. So the question you're answering here is what? When followers are low in competence and in confidence, the most effective style of leadership is directing. And I think this is why most preachers and most churches never get beyond this style. They spend their life just telling people what to do. And the style is, it's highly directive, but there's little relational encouragement here. Now, the second style is what we call coaching. Coaching. You could use different words to define it. Mentoring, fathering, there's different words, but coaching is a good word. The word coaching, this is where you begin teaching them how to do it. And the question you're answering now is how, not what, but you've switched to how we're going to accomplish this, how we're going to do. Now, there's a big difference between the first style of directing and the second of coaching. And that's basically the attitude of the follower. The follower now, you are entering into an emotional relationship with them so that you're teaching them the feelings behind this, how this is going to work. Now, the followers still at this point, they've learned what to do, but they don't have the confidence of doing it. That's why you have to encourage them. But the difference is between the first stage and the second is they're now ready to learn. They're eager to learn. They want to be a disciple. They don't just want to be told what. They want to be involved in this process. So it's still high in being directive, but the leader now is becoming emotionally involved with them. This is what Jesus did. He called it discipling. He chose them to be with him. He made them his disciples and spent time and built relationship with them. Okay, the third style is what we'll call the supporting style. The supporting style, now you shift the emphasis to encouragement. Encouraging them. You're now answering the question, why? Now, all of this takes time. I have done this for so many years of taking people with me. I try to do this continually. And I think of it in my mind as one of the most important things that I do. Rather than just teaching a large group, no, I've got my helpers that I have with me, and then after the meeting, I'm telling them, this is why I did this, because if I had done this, something else would have taken place. And so I'm giving them the whys to the decision-making process, giving them the whys. At this point, you become low in your directive. You don't have to tell them everything to do. Now they have learned what they are to do and how to do it. And basically, they know how to do the job. The only thing that they're really lacking is confidence. Confidence. And so they're not ready to go do it alone, but they will come with you. And so it's at that stage, I stop doing the job. I start promoting them and pushing them into that position. So the style is less directive, but it still maintains a very high level of emotional support. And then finally, the fourth stage, delegating. Delegating. I think one of the biggest problems that too many leaders have in leadership is they assume their followers know more than they know, are more confident than they really are, and they push them out too soon. They actually have set them up for failure. Delegating, that's where you release them. You let them go. That's knowing how to answer the question, when? When is the time ready? Now, when you get to this point, you're both your directive and your emotional support decreases, is very low. You don't have to invest all the time and energy that you were before because they're ready to do it now. The followers know how to do the work. They're willing to take the responsibility to see that it is done. It's become quite non-directive. It provides minimal relational support, and you trust the follower to be able to take and carry out the work. Now, here's something that I've discovered that is key in understanding this process. In the first two styles of leading, the directing and the coaching, you set the pace. You tell them this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But when you come to those last two stages, the supporting, encouraging, and the delegating, releasing them, you now have to step back as a leader and let them walk it out at their own pace. That's very difficult for a leader to do because you've been used to calling the shots. You've been used to making the decision. But when you come to these last two styles of leadership, you have to back off, take the pressure off, and let them walk through it at their own stage. I've discovered for myself that is one of the most difficult parts about it. But unless I do that, they're never really going to be ready for the responsibility. They will not be ready to take on the challenge. See, relationships are living organisms. There's life in this. And if we abuse it, if we misuse it, we will kill it. That our goal should be to bring them to maturity. Now, in bringing them to maturity, here's what you have to do. Leaders must adopt and adapt their leadership to the maturity of their followers. Every good teacher does this. A good teacher knows how to ask some good questions. Why? Because in asking the questions, you find out the level of the maturity of your followers. They're not all the same. In fact, followers range back and forth on the maturity scale. They may be very mature in one area of their life and very immature in another area of their life. And so you have to adapt to your followers. I've indeed traveling around the world and teaching pastors, one of the things that I've learned that I have to do is find out what the educational level is. Find out what they know about the Bible. If I don't plug into their world, into their culture, I'm not going to be effective in communicating. I've got to be able to either increase it or decrease it according to their maturity, according to what they know. And the more effective that I am in reading my audience and seeing what, if they don't understand, then I've got to bring it down to their level and make it simple for them. Good teachers all do this. And dealing with the different students, you have to do the same thing, because every student is uniquely different. What the leader's goal is to move the people toward maturity. The way I think of it in my mind is, there's basically two things I'm interested in. I want to find out where they are and what they need to take the next step. That's all it is. I don't want to teach them everything about the Bible. I'm not interested in trying to make them spiritual giants. No, I'm just trying to find out where they are and then help them take the next step. And if I do that effectively, then them taking the next step, that's my success. Their success becomes my success. See, this is the way relational leaders think. It's the way that they operate. Servant leadership empowers the people. That's what it's about. See, in servant leadership, both the leader and the follower are growing. Here's how. The follower is growing in skills to do the job. The leader is growing by added influence and by a reduced burden. That's what I did not understand when I began this process of training and mentoring and equipping others. I knew they needed me, and they needed what I knew, and I had to teach them in part. What I did not know was how much I needed them. Because as we age and our bodies age, we can't do some of the things that we used to. We need somebody to help us. And so both the leader and the follower need each other. If this is going to work, they've got to cooperate together. And I've discovered as a leader, I am no better than the people that's following me. I'm the one that has to set the pace, say where we're going, give the directions, but then I have to back off and let them give me some insight that I would not have if I assumed that I knew everything by myself. Now, let me give you an illustration in the Bible that's a tragic illustration, but it's classic. The story of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. He's what I will call the foolish king. The foolish king. When he became the king, he calls the people together to talk about his reign as the king. And the older generation began to say to him, please, can you reduce the tax burden on us? Your father was building so many things. Is there any way you can reduce our burden? And so he said, well, go away, come back in 3 days, and I'll give you my answer. And he called the elders around to give him advice. And these elders said, and I quote from 1 Kings 12:7, if you will be a servant to these people today, then they will be your servants forever. Oh, that was good advice. What they said to him was exactly what he needed to do, because he's just becoming the king. He hasn't earned any right for this. He just simply inherited it. They gave him some good advice. If you'll serve them today, then they will become your servants forever. But he didn't like that advice. Most young leaders don't. And so what he did, he calls in his friends, his peers, and says, what am I supposed to do? And his friends weren't any wiser than he was. And they said, you answer them roughly. You tell them who's the boss. And you tell them that your little finger's going to be thicker than your father's waist. Oh, what foolish talk. How foolish can you be? And of course, what happened was the people said, all right, see how you like being king alone. And they walked out on him. And the whole kingdom was divided. What a foolish, foolish decision. Now, here's what I learned from this. Leaders hold something very fragile in their hands: the hopes and the dreams of their people. And they must be treated with great respect. Well, some of the things that I have learned in my travels is every person there has a dream. That's why they're there. Everyone there they're hoping for something better. And I've discovered their time is just as valuable as my time. In fact, their time is more important because there's more of them than there is me. One of the most important things I ever learned about time was years ago. I had this gentleman, I was to teach, and I was 2 minutes late. There was like 30 people or so in the class, and so I'm sorry, I'm 2 minutes late. There was a wise man spoke up, and he said, you're not 2 minutes late, you're 1 hour late, because you got to multiply those 2 minutes by every person in this room. Oh, it gave me a total new appreciation for time. But what you learn as a relational leadership, it's not about you. It's about the followers, helping them. I can remember as a young preacher that I would do this. And you may consider this something that's very foolish, but I was so zealous for God. I would practice everything. I would read my Bible out loud so that those names, and boy, some of them are tongue twisters, they would roll off my tongue. I would read my Bible out. I would practice walking on the platform. They tell us you've only got 30 seconds to 2 minutes before an audience makes up its mind whether or not they're going to listen to you. Oh, man. I would do all of these things, and then one day I discovered, wait a minute. It's not about me and how good I can teach or how good I can preach. It's about them. And if their life is not changed, then I'm wasting their time and my life. That's what relational leadership is all about. Rehoboam lost it. Rehoboam crushed the people's dreams in a fist of power. Show them who is the boss. That's a tragedy. That is never the way that Jesus did it. You never find an example of him coming in and say, well, I'm the Son of God, and if you don't do it, he did not lead that way. And if we're going to follow the example of Jesus Christ and be relational leaders, then we're going to have to learn to do it the Jesus way. Follow his model. The Bible said he came very meek and humble. He did not come demanding his own rights. No, he came serving others. In fact, those are the words of Christ. He said, I did not come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life a ransom for many. Wow, what powerful words. That is what has shaped my thinking as a spiritual leader, and I think that a big part of my success that I've had in ministry is simply because I followed the biblical model. I did what Jesus did the way that Jesus did it. And it works. It works. And so I've discovered that every person listening to me has dreams and aspirations. And I must never, never crush those dreams in a fist of power. Rather, I must learn to elevate them, help them take the next step, show them the things that they're lacking, the things that are missing, to help them to be able to fulfill the God-given dream. And as I help them fulfill their dreams, leading becomes easy. Leading becomes simple. This is the Jesus model. And that's what Jude is talking about. Don't be like the people that come to the love feast to feed themselves. They're not thinking about anybody else. They're only thinking of themselves. If you do that, you're making a tragic mistake. I don't want to be that way. I want to be like Jesus. I want to follow his example. And by doing so, we will be fruitful and we'll be able to bless, impart to those that are following us. May God bless you on your Christian journey.